Good morning. This tutorial is going to deal with creating your own copyright file. There are times when you might like to identify ownership right on the front of an image. For example, if you're putting it up on a website and it's not for sale and you would just like people to enjoy it, but you want them to know it's yours, you can put your copyright on and not have to type it on each image separately. We'll create a file, and that file can be dragged onto the front of your image when you want to put a copyright. There are many ways we can dress it up and make it more transparent, but we're going to start by creating a very simple copyright. So if you will go to your software and you're using some version of Adobe software, we're going to make a new file by going File, New, Blank File. And when you want to make a copyright, your file you work on must be transparent. So in this new window, if you look at the bottom background contents, yours might say white. Whatever it says, be sure you change it to say transparent. That means when you drag your copyright onto a picture, you won't have a white box around it. You'll just have the text that you created. And the size of this will depend somewhat on the length of the name you're going to put on your copyright. We're going to make it bigger than is really necessary. I'm going to make it 800 pixels wide and 800 pixels high. And if your thing isn't set to pixels, if it's set to inches, you change that to pixels and type them in as 800. And I'm going to give a name to this. And you might put your name on it. I'm going to write Frost Copyright. And so give it some sort of a name before you start. And then let's check to be sure we agree that it's 800 pixels wide, 800 pixels high. I've left the resolution at 300, and I'll deal with that a little later in the lesson. But that's the most common resolution of images that we print, and we'll talk later about it. But for the time being, leave the resolution at 300 and make the background contents transparent. Otherwise, you could leave things alone and click OK. You will now get within the viewing area on your software a transparent box. How big that is probably because it's fitting into the area that you have for an image. And of course, if you'll notice in that file, it tells you what percent of full size it is, and it's chosen to make it fit in the vision area for your image. And so that it can vary slightly, but the actual dimensions we have established as 800 pixels wide and 800 pixels high. We're going to put a copyright in here, and I have provided you with a tutorial on how to make a copyright out of a text tool. For people who are on a Mac, they simply have to type with the Option key down the letter G, and they get a copyright symbol. It's a little more complicated on Windows, but I've given you directions for how to use it. It involves typing a character number, and it brings up the copyright. But for the time being, we're going to use a copyright symbol, which can be available on any version of Adobe software in the palette under where symbols are. Here it is on Elements. I understand it's closer to the hand tool on a full version of Photoshop. When I click on that, I have an option bar, and I have a shape tool as one of the options. So I'm clicked on the shape tool, and it shows me the pre-existing whatever I've used. And if I just click on that shape that shows, at the top it says default. Well, I can go and change it to any set of shapes I want. So if I click on the end of that, you'll see lots of shapes. The one that has the copyright in the group is called symbols. So if you'll check your list for symbols and click on it, you have a bunch of symbols. And by scrolling down on that window, you find a nice copyright symbol near the end. Now, this is not a font character. This is a draw character. So I click on the one I want, and it pops down in the option bar. It shows me I've chosen the copyright symbol. I want to be sure that the color is set to black for this part of our activity. If you don't have black as the color here, you can click on it there, or you can click on it as the foreground icon and set it to black. So if it's black and there's black here, we know that we draw this, it will be black. So I'm going to take my cursor up in the top of the window, holding the mouse button down, I'm going to drag out a shape that is a copyright. I don't know for sure how big it should be now, but because it's a shape, it can be resized later, so I don't have to worry about it. I have a copyright available. I'm now ready to type in the text for my copyright. And so I'm going to go and click on the text tool. And when I click on the text tool, I will get a choice of fonts. And the font I want to use has to be very bold. So if I look up here at Arial Black Regular, look at how broad it looks like on the sample. That will be a good choice. If I click Arial Black Regular, that is the font listed down below. And the size, I won't really know until I click my text tool onto my document. So right in the middle, I'm going to click my text tool. And that little blinking bar shows me how big it is. If I have a fair amount of text to put there, that may be too large font to fit on my document. So I can come down here and change my font size. And I'm going to put mine down at maybe 11, just something small enough to give me room. And then I want you to be sure that your orientation is to make it centered. And if it's centered, you will be able to fit your text into the width of this document because it will spread out from the middle toward both edges. So let's look again. We have chosen a font which is bold and it's wide and thick. We've chosen the black color. I have chosen an 11 point. You could use 10 or 12. And I want to be sure it says the middle choice here, which is to center the text. At this point, I might tell you that we have another option. If you want this text to end up a little bit bolder than it came, we have little faux controls for style. And there is a B for bold, and it is not a genuine part of the font you've chosen, but it will add to it. I'm going to click on the B so that when I type in my thing, it's as broad as it can be. So I'm now ready where I have a blinking cursor. I already have a copyright symbol up above. So I'm going to put in the date, which is 2017. I'm going to follow that immediately with the name as I want it to appear. I'm going to put a capital M-L, capital F, and a small case for the rest of my name. You can use uppercase, lowercase, any way you want your name to exist on the copyright. And once you've done that, you're ready to OK it. And that means you either use the Enter or the Return key, or in Elements, you can use the green check mark. We've now created the text for our copyright. Look at your Layers panel. You have 3 layers. You have the original layer that we created. You have a layer above it that has the shape on it. And you have a layer above that, which is your text layer. They're all separate. I want to go to the layer that has my shape, so I'm going to click on that shape layer. I'm going to get the Move tool, and I'm going to grab my shape. And it's important that you grab the shape, not the blank space. And if it doesn't move with you, you didn't click right on the symbol. So I clicked on it, and I moved it down till it's approximately right. When you move objects small distances in Photoshop software, it's very useful to use the arrow keys on your keyboard. I want to make that closer to the 2017, and I can't drag it small amounts. But if I take the right arrow key, I can move it just as far as I want. If I think that it is too large for this, then I go with my cursor and I point to the corner of the document till I get a slanting arrow. I then hold down the mouse button and drag toward the middle, and it becomes smaller. So if I made mine bigger than it needs to be for the size of my font, I can resize it with the corners, accept my resizing with either return, enter, or the green check mark. And now I think I need to move it closer. So I'm going to take the right arrow key. In fact, it's too low. So I'm going to use the up arrow key and center it. So I think it looks pretty well next to my text. So you do that till you feel it looks like it belongs to your text. And you can be fussy about that until you get it where you like it. Okay? And now I'm ready to turn this into a copyright file. Well, the first thing I need to do is to look over at my layers. The next step is really important. When you have a transparent document and you want to merge your layers into one layer and you want to leave it transparent, you must use the control merge visible. If you flatten this file, it will be white. When you put it on a document, you'll have a white box around your copyright. I want it to stay transparent. So I go up to layer, and at the bottom I look for merge visible. That means all of these layers, which are all visible, will be merged, but you won't lose transparency. So I'll click it. I have a single layer with my copyright, and it is still on a transparent background. So now I'm going to crop away the unnecessary part of this document. So I'm going to go to my crop tool, make sure there's no width and height given, that it's without any restriction. If you're using a recent form of elements, you'll get this dumb crop box. If you don't want to keep it, you can click on the red stop mark and you won't lose your crop tool. Now it looks like a normal crop tool. I start where I want to and I crop this till I think I have it around my document. I fine tune it by going to the corners or the middle. In this case, I think that the top is a little bit too far up. And when I think I've made a file that is a little space around my copyright, but clearly doesn't clip my copyright, I'm ready to click either the green check or the enter or return key. I have created a copyright file that is transparent. I'm going to save this, and I don't want to lose the transparency. So we have a very tricky format to save it in. So if you will go up to File, Save As. At the top, it picked up the name I gave this file when I first created it. If you didn't give it a name, yours will say Untitled. Or if you want to enter a different name for this copyright file, you simply type it in there. And you'll notice where it's going to go. So if you have a spot that you want to put this, you change that. I am working on the class of July 8th, and I'm going to change the location to the Saturday class, July 8th. And that means when it's saved, it's going to go back onto my class file. Good place to keep it, right where the directions for creating it are found. But big, important next step. You may not save this as either Photoshop or JPEG. In fact, the only format that will maintain its transparency is PNG. Every so often people ask me, what on earth is that for? That keeps the transparency of your file. So I've chosen the extension to be PNG. I can look up here at the top and see it. I'm saving it, in my case, as Frost Copyright, but I'm saving it as a PNG file, and it's going into my Saturday class July 8th folder. You can put it anywhere you want it. And then I click Save. And I have now had a PNG option thing, and it often defaults to a very slow, small file, and I always change it to none fast. That means this is such a tiny file, it does not need to be compressed. We can use it at its full pixel size. So I leave this at none and none, and then I say OK. We now have created a document that will maintain its transparency. And to prove it, if you have saved it, as I have asked, we can close it and reopen it. So let's go and shut down this file. And don't save it anymore because you've saved it the right way. Let's reopen it to guarantee to ourselves that it will still be transparent. File, open, go to where you saved it. I saved it in Saturday class, and I saved it as the Frost copyright PNG. Oh, I called it copyright. Well, it won't hurt. And then I'm going to go and put it down at open. There it is. It popped open just as I created it. So it kind of just assures you, if you do save it as a PNG file, that's how it will come. Now, I would like you to see what happens when we use it. So I'm going to ask you to go to File Open. You may open any file that you have on your desktop or your computer. If you're working in my class with my class things, I'm going to go File Open. And in my Saturday class, I had a folder called Copyright Practice Images, and in it is Coral Garden JPEG. I'm going to open that one, but you're welcome to open any file you want. And when it opens, I'm going to put a copyright on it. And when you do this, the simplest way is to have your copyright file open and go and get your Move tool. Come in and click on the copyright. Don't click in the blank space. Click on the text and drag it on. If it doesn't come the first time, do it a second. First time it just selects it. I drag it and let go, and I have a very simple copyright on my image, and I can move it to wherever I want it to be in the image. And then if it's too bold and I don't want it, I want it to be more subtle, I can go to my layers panel, and you'll notice it came in on its own layer. And for that layer, I can lower the opacity, and that will enable me to just soften it so it's visible, but not so harsh. Because we're also going to look at transparent copyrights, I want you to know this is very light because we lowered the opacity, but it still is covering up the part of the image that's under it. And that's fine. What we call an item that you put on, like a copyright, that lets the picture show through is a watermark. And I'm going to show you how to make this into a watermark so that wherever you place it, you see the picture through the bold part of the text. If I were to move this one up and put it on the pink, you'll see that you see the same appearance to the copyright. It's just on pink. Come back here, it looks the same. So this is a very standard copyright, and it will enable you to have a file that you can add to your documents. If this satisfies you and you want something very simple, you can take this copyright and you can go and if you're in full Photoshop and you're using the batch processor, which is process multiple files, you have a place in that for an action. And if you want to turn this into an action, that's a separate lesson. What you will do is create an action in your full Photoshop, and when you create it, all you do is get a new action document, and you know how to do it, and you start the recording device in the action panel, and you repeat the steps that we went through. And when you're done, you stop the recording, and you have created an action so that you could use this copyright on all of your images. The difficulty with it is it's not likely, unless you go through some special extra steps, it's not likely to end up exactly where you want it on your image. So I have provided for people in full Photoshop a PDF file which tells you how to create an action that will always go to the same corner of every image. And it is something which can only be done with the full version of Photoshop, which allows you to build an action. and it has a few extra steps. So I'm leaving it there for anyone who'd like to figure out how to make an action. What we've done here is given you a file which you could save on the desktop of your computer, and whenever you have an image you're preparing for the internet, one step in preparing it after it's all ready to go upload could be to add a copyright by just dragging it, and if it's right there on your desktop, it's easy to find. One other thing while we're on this tutorial is to say, if it comes in and the size is not right for what you want, you can resize this. So if you're on the right layer for where your copyright was dragged in, and you're in the Move tool, and you want to play with this file, the simplest way to do that is to go to your Transform tool. So if you go Image, Transform, Free Transform, or Controller Command T, you've got edges on this again. And if I go to the corner of that, on Elements, it will automatically maintain the right proportions, so I'm not going to skinny it or make it tall. But if you're on a full Photoshop and you don't want to lose that height and width ratio, you would hold your Shift key to maintain it. I'm working on Elements, so if I grab that corner and I get a diagonal arrow, I can drag that arrow in and make this smaller. Or if it was too small when I put it into my image, I could make it bigger. So when you're using it as a single application to a single file, it really doesn't matter if it comes in the right size, because you can size it appropriately to go on that image. So at this point, I'm going to accept it that I like both the size and I like the opacity. So I'm going to accept that. And if this was my image and I was finished with it, I would save it again so it now contains a visible copyright. This will end this one video tutorial on a very simple copyright.